Now, the International Cooperation Minister, Sahar Nasir, has confirmed that Egypt signed a deal earlier this year for a $2 billion central bank deposit from Saudi Arabia. The raft of agreements with Saudi Arabia were signed during a visit by the Saudi king in April, including plans for a 60 billion Saudi riyal, that's about $16 billion investment fund. Egypt is currently scrambling to secure some $5 billion to $6 billion in bilateral financing needed to ensure that a $12 billion lending program agreed with the International Monetary Fund last week will sail through. Egypt is struggling also to rebuild an economy battered by turmoil since a 2011 uprising won staff-level agreement for the three-year IMF lending program last week. Staying in Egypt, the state is now ordering some women working as television anchors to practice restraint, not only with what they say, but their weight. Earlier this week, Safa Hegazi, the director of state-run Egyptian radio and television, barred 8 anchors, that's female anchors, from appearing on the air for a month, saying they were overweight, ordering the women to go on a diet during their suspension. Khadija Katab, one of the 8 anchor women, said that she had not yet been formally notified of the order, but added that she was recently told that measures will be taken against those who fail to lose weight by mid-September. Well, for more on both of these developments, we go live to Cairo, where the Voice of America's Edward Iranian is standing by. Edward, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
My pleasure as always, Cynthia.
Well, let's begin with the loan from Saudi Arabia. I think now we officially know why those islands were given to the Saudi king. So what's the status of that at the moment?
Well, I don't think the media has commented on that, but there were reports from Egyptian officials, I believe last week, that no money has come so far, or money has not come for a certain number of months. Saudi Arabia is facing financial difficulties itself, financing the war in Yemen. Also, with low oil prices, it's having to deal with its own bloated public sector. So I suspect the reason the Egyptian minister mentioned the $2 billion was perhaps to spur the Saudis on to actually giving it.
Well, any word on the IMF deal so far? Has the executive committee gone ahead to approve the loan?
Well, no, there is absolutely no indication that it has, and the country director indicated that Egypt would have to come up with bilateral financing in order to clinch the deal. I think he said $5 or $6 billion in bilateral financing, which is probably why Egypt's international cooperation minister indicated that it did have at least the oral agreement from Saudi Arabia to give $2 billion.
Well, Edward, now to the issue of the female anchors who have been labeled to be overweight, who have also been placed on suspension in Egypt. What was that about? Well,
I think most Arab news channels, the ones that are sort of global, regional, Arab-wide, based in the Gulf, have these kinds of strictures. They've fired Lebanese anchor women that I know of for being overweight. They just don't talk about it a lot. And I think Egypt is sort of trying to shake off its stodgy reputation because it's not able to compete with many of those outside stations. Perhaps it's an embarrassment to the Egyptians that this became an international issue and made the foreign media, foreign press. But at the same time, it's a common practice. I've heard about it before. It's ugly, but there we have it. It's part of the TV culture in the Arab world.
But in all honesty, this is like a paradox, Edward, because you're saying they're trying to compete and it's somewhat embarrassing. But this is more embarrassing to send women home and you know, it's an esteem issue, saying at the moment they're being labeled fat and asked to go home to lose the weight in a bid to actually improve ratings, when we actually understand that the station's level of bias is what has actually prompted the ratings to drop to the level which it has at the moment.
Well, I don't really put a lot of stock in polls or that sort of measurement of audience or viewers' opinion in general. But let's assume they're true. There are a lot of other reasons why Egyptian public media would be losing viewership, not to mention the sheer power of the competition from the outside. And a lot of that does deal with hiring young, attractive anchors and young, attractive presenters. And I think a lot of it, the viewership is driven by men. Men control the TV remote in most families, and I guess they like to watch pretty young women. I hate to say it, but that's the truth.
Well, Edward, have there been any reaction from the authorities regarding this? Because I know you're saying that it doesn't really make, you know, news there, but it's making news where we are because it's very discriminatory.
Yes, I mean, there are a lot of discriminatory practices in the Arab world that are not necessarily talked about, but are part of the culture. And they continue to be part of the culture, no matter how much people from the outside try to shame them. Yeah. This is probably one of those things.
Well, Edward, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa. We appreciate your time, as always.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Now, a solar project in Mali's volatile north is bringing much-needed power to residents of Kidal town. That's a flashpoint of violence between Tuareg and Islamist groups where sporadic attacks continue. Mali's government has not had a military presence in Kidal since clashes between the army and Tuareg rebels killed about 50 soldiers back in 2014, making it very difficult to access services like electricity.
The security situation remains risky in the northern Kidal region and left the community with limited access to electricity. A large lighting project with solar energy funded by Canada in partnership with MINUSMA has brought electricity back to over 1,500 households in the circle of Kidal. The families that have benefited from these kits are very happy, not only because they have left the darkness behind, but also the kits allowed children to study in the evenings and women to continue their activities at night. To enhance the local workforce, the local NGO Association for Training, Research and Development was selected to implement a 6-month-long lighting project. The project is funded by close to 90 million CFA, that is $150,000 given the urgency of the situation. This project has distributed solar kits to population in need to allow people light their homes, and it allows children to study at home now that they get electricity service in Kidal. Though the security situation in Kidal is still risky, the lighting project slowly brought people back to the town and gave out a sense of hope that peace will soon return to the region.